where freedom is in our hands. We are walking to the promised land, where freedom is in our hands. Oh, we are walking to the promised land, where freedom is in our hands. Lord said we are walking to the promised land, Lord, where freedom is in our hands. Hey, freedom is what we need. Freedom is what we plead. Freedom is what we need. Lord, 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 Lord. Freedom is what we plead for. We are walking to the promised land, and we are walking where freedom is in our hand. We are walking to the promised land, yeah, where freedom is in our hand. Sing of freedom, freedom, freedom is what we need, yeah, Lord, Lord. Freedom is what we need. Freedom is what we need, yeah, Lord, Lord. Freedom is what we plead for. We are walking to the promised land. We are walking to the promised land. Oh Lord, we are walking to the promised land. We are walking to the promised land. Oh Lord, we are walking to the promised land, where freedom is in our hands. Oh Lord, walking to the promised land, where freedom is in our hands. We are walking to the promised land, Lord, Lord, where freedom is in our hands. Oh Lord, 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 is in our hands. Oh Lord, is in our hands. Oh Lord, 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 is in our hands.
One, two, three, and
Low down the chariot, let me ride. 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 Low the chariot, let me ride. Low down the chariot, let me ride. Low down the chariot, let me ride. Ride on, King Jesus. Ride on, King Jesus. Ride on, the conquering King. I wanna go to heaven in the morning. Ride on, King Jesus. Ride on, King Jesus. Ride on, the conquering King. I wanna go to heaven in the morning. I've been trying so hard to make it on through. I've been trying to live the way God want me to. I'm gonna say goodbye to all my sin and strife. I don't wanna miss that great glory ride. So when you break on through that golden sky, please slow it down. Don't pass me by. I'm gonna swing that chariot low. I'm gonna go black Elijah when I King. I wanna go to heaven in the morning. Ride on, King Jesus. Ride on, King Jesus. Ride on, the conquering King. I wanna go to heaven in the morning. Oh Lord, on a chariot, let me ride. Let me ride. Low down the chariots, let me ride. Low down the chariots, let me ride. Oh Lord, down the chariot, let me ride. Down the chariot, let me ride. Low down the chariots, let me ride. Low down the chariot.
Our Father in heaven, we give you thanks and we praise your holy name for your goodness and your mercies toward your children. We thank you, Lord, for the privilege of service. We thank you for ASI and for the tremendous job of work that they do as they represent you at the workplace. Under the theme, Break Out of Our Walls to Enlarge Our Territories, we have come this week to praise your name and to ask, Father, for your leadership, your direction, as you continue to guide this organization the way you want us to go. We thank you for those who have gathered this evening for this panel discussion. And we pray, Lord, that you will give them clarity of thought and expression, and help that they will speak in a manner that will bring encouragement and hope to their listeners, and that they themselves will recognize that our country is in need of their expertise, and they will continue to be a blessing to all those with whom they come in contact. We thank you for the leadership of ASI and the tremendous job of work that they continue to do as they lead the business persons and the professional persons of the Seventh-day Adventist Church to realize the goals of this organization. We thank you, Lord, and we pray that you will continue to bless each one of them. Bless them in their businesses as they share you at the workplace. I pray that you will pour out your blessings on those with whom they share, and that you will give them the means by which they can continue to do the number of projects that they are doing to make life better for humanity, for the less fortunate in our society. Bless this evening's activities, and we pray that our listeners, our viewers, will reap maximum benefit. Give us all attentive ears, I pray. And when we shall have left this place, may we know that you have been with us, and may we be resolved to go and do what you have called us to do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
This is ASI Week of Celebrations, night number 2. Wherever you are, whether you are listening or you're watching us, just send the link to somebody out there, inviting them to join us for night 2, which is going to be fantastic and great. We at Jamaica Union ASI are welcoming you to tonight's program. We are so happy that you have decided to just spend a couple of hours with us. As you know, ASI, when you spend time with ASI, it gives you more value than the time that you spent. ASI, for those who want to be reminded, is the business and professional arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Jamaica, and we encompass the full range of offerings in this business and professional circle that we have here in Jamaica. We have lawyers, we have doctors, we have welders, we have mechanics, we have manufacturers, we have distribution companies, we have many small and large businesses who play a role in this ASI. ASI seeks to develop harmony with sharing Christ in the marketplace. We also seek to encourage the use of unique ways of reaching people who are in contact with us on a daily basis as members. We also encourage business networking, which means we encourage ASI members to trade together, to do business and encourage others around them to do their business. And so we are very pleased and happy to be having this ASI week. We started last night and it was good. Tonight, you are in for a treat. You'll get advice and ways how you can navigate the situation that we face here in Jamaica. And tomorrow night, we are going to be showcasing the businesses of the ASI and the businesses across Jamaica. So we have your videos. We have your videos of the nurses, of the pharmacists, of the store owners. We have them, and we will be sharing them tomorrow night. So you can come and see some of the businesses that you need to support in the ASI fraternity. We also will have our very own Georgia Finnekin, who will be showing us and teaching you and encouraging you to start business. And in doing so, you will be taught how to register your business in a proper way and how to get through the ropes in order to start your business. You might just be a farmer. We need you to do it and do it right. So tonight, we are looking for a wonderful night. Tomorrow will be a wonderful night also. Wednesday, we will have a real soul-stirring message from our West Jamaica ASI President, Wayne Clark, and you can't miss it. We also have on Thursday night the youth and more youth. Then Friday night, it is music, music, and music. And Sabbath, we are going to take the house down as we have the one and only Glenn O. Samuels, who will give us the message in the morning, and in the evening, we have Dr. James, who will talk about the health issues that you should prevent as you live and breathe and just occupy until he comes. I want to welcome everybody who, our guests, I won't tell you their names, and our moderators, and our guests, and they're all our friends, and we want them to feel real comfortable tonight, and so looking forward to a wonderful night. I thank you for joining, whether you're on NCU radio, wherever you are, whether you are in Barbados or Trinidad or Cayman Islands, welcome. And let's have a great night tonight.
Good evening, everyone, here in the studio in Kingston, Jamaica, and those watching at the different platforms in different parts of the world. ASI is very pleased to be able to put on this session this evening, and we hope that you will get a lot of good things from this session, and we are happy that you have tuned in to hear and to ask questions about the very important topic that we are going to talk about this evening. The pleasure is mine this evening to introduce the moderator for this evening's session. Professor Alvin Went is a emeritus professor of international business at the University of the West Indies. Professor Wint has served the university for many years and served in different capacities. Of the several areas that he has served, one of them include being the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies. Professor Wint is the author of 5 books, and he has published several papers on different topics which are of interest to people in Jamaica and indeed the world. He was most recently appointed chairman of the Heart NSTA Trust, which is the vocational training arm of the government of Jamaica. And we congratulate Prof for this achievement, and we wish him well in this position. Professor Wint is also a director of the NCB group here in Jamaica, a large Jamaican bank. This evening, Professor Wint will guide a very distinguished panelist of Jamaican business professional persons. He will be guiding the questions, and we are encouraging you out there to just post your questions, and those questions will be forwarded to Professor Wint as he guides this process this evening. The topic that we have chosen this evening is the Jamaican government or the Jamaican economy going the right direction? Is the Jamaican economy going the right direction? Listen to the questions. Send your questions in. We want to hear your questions, and we wish all the panelists God's blessings, and we hope that it will be a learning experience for all who hear and watch this program this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elder Thomas, and let me add my welcome to all of you who are listening or watching online. I certainly want to welcome our distinguished panelists. Let me commend the work of ASI. They continue to do a great job in delivering this message of community outreach, and we really appreciate the work that the business arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been doing. It's really my pleasure to be with you all today exploring this really, really important topic. Is the Jamaican economy going in the right direction? And just to put a little bit of context, we're asking this question, obviously, in June of 2022. And it's worthwhile thinking a little bit about what has been happening in Jamaica over the last several decades. Because if we go back 30 years ago, we started a process of liberalizing the Jamaican economy. And that process was very, very important, but we didn't manage it very well. And the consequence of not managing the liberalization of the Jamaican economy very well led to a situation where the economy actually continued, in fact, became even more unstable in some respects post the liberalization period, which ended in the early 1990s. As a consequence of that, we had major challenges. We had a financial sector crisis in the late 1990s and continued from that to an extremely debilitating and challenging debt crisis. About 12 years ago, we initiated, with a great degree of national policy cohesion and bipartisan support, we proceeded on a process of really stabilizing the Jamaican economy by bringing debt levels down. And we were really beginning to see all the green shoots. All the numbers were seemingly going in the right direction, except, John, as we will talk a little bit about, of course, our crime and corruption challenge. But certainly at the macroeconomic level, we were seeing
growth beginning to move in the right direction, unemployment going down, the debt levels were going down. And then, so had we asked this question 3 years ago, I think there would have been a reasonable consensus suggesting that at the macroeconomic policy level, we were moving in the right direction. We weren't where we wanted to be, but we were generally moving in the right direction. But we've had what economists would call exogenous shocks, 2 of them. The first, obviously, was our COVID-19 shock. It was not something with which we had control, but what we have to look at in today's session is how have we managed that shock? And then just as things seem to be stabilizing on the COVID-19 front and we start to be seeing some return to normalcy, we get another exogenous shock, the Russian-Ukraine crisis. And that has led to all kinds of phenomena right across the world. Here in Jamaica, we have the highest level of inflation we've had in many years, but we're not unique. So the US has its highest inflation of the last 40 years. So the question that we have is how have we managed that particular exogenous shock? So really we're asking the question about has the economy moved in the right direction? Is it now moving in the right direction in the context of our current situation? And I'm so pleased to say we have such a distinguished set of panelists to walk us through this particular situation. And our panelists are independent. And what do I mean by that? They don't have responsibility to manage the economy, and they're not competing to manage the economy. Of course, if you talk to individuals who have the responsibility to manage the economy, they will say the economy is going in the right direction. If you talk to individuals who are competing to manage the economy, in other words, the political opposition, they will say the economy is going in the wrong direction. What we want are individuals who have neither set of responsibilities so we can get an unbiased perspective on how the economy is moving. And we certainly have 3 stalwarts to help us in that process. On my immediate left, we have Mr. Dennis Chung. Dennis is no stranger to Jamaica media. He is a well-accomplished both columnist and media reporter, providing incisive comments in the media on a routine basis. He's a financial accountant by training, holding the designations both of chartered accountant and he's also an accountant that has experience and expertise in the United States. So he's also a CPA, a certified public accountant. But Dennis has gone way beyond his accounting, and incidentally, he has served as president of our local accountancy organization, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Jamaica. But he's also been very involved in the private and public sectors. He currently is the CEO of Supreme Ventures. He certainly in the past served as the CEO of the private sector organization of Jamaica. Several years ago, he took on a very important task, which was to help to clean up Jamaica. And in that capacity, he became chairman of the National Solid Waste Management Agency. And he's also an author. And this doesn't appear in his biography, but he's an avid cyclist. Next to Dennis is Anya Walker. Anya is a vice president at NCB Capital Markets. She is a vice president with a very important set of responsibilities. Her vice presidential roles include strategy, research, and innovation. And if you were to say, you know, what do you want to have as a role as a vice president? You probably would say strategy, research, and innovation. And so Anya really provides a really important role within the NCB Capital Markets and the broader NCB organizational structure. And she has actually been at the core of many of the innovations that have come through the NCB Capital Markets organization. But also in the context of some of the things that we'll be talking about today, her past experience in the public sector is quite important also, because she came to NCB from the Bank of Jamaica, where she served as an economist. And she's not the only person with Bank of Jamaica experience, since Dennis served as a member of the board of the Bank of Jamaica in the past. And then we have Mr. John Mafu. Again, no stranger. John has been engaging in incisive commentary in Jamaica for quite a few years now. He also is an accountant by training with designation, again, both of chartered accountant and is a CPA.
But he also has tremendous business experience. He currently serves as the CEO of Jamaica Teas and has had a very important role with the private sector in other areas also. He's a philanthropist and a humanitarian. And then recently, about a year now, it probably seems, I don't know if it seems longer or shorter than that to you, John, he became the president of the Jamaican Manufacturers and Exporters Association, a really important Jamaican organization, given its role in championing the role of both manufacturing and exporting activity, two interlinked activities that are so important to Jamaica. But what I think is really helpful to us in the discussion today is that our three panelists are, unlike some commentators, they don't come to us with many, many, many hands. You know, you have some commentators that will tell you on this hand, and then on the other hand, and then there's another perspective, and then there's a fourth perspective, and you say to yourself, how many hands do they have? What I think is clear, certainly what I have gleaned from my public and private hearing of John and Dennis, I haven't heard Anya privately so much, but I have had the pleasure of listening to her present to the board of NCB Capital Markets, and she's very confident and very astute in her presentations. Our panelists here, they restrict themselves to two hands, and like good pugilists, they tend to lead with one. So you never really have too much of a question as to what is their view. They're pretty clear as to their position, which I think is very, very helpful in the context of this topic that we're looking at today, that is really trying to give us a sense of where we are. What I'm hoping also, and you know, our opening prayer by Princess Laura suggested this, we want to also have a solution-oriented element to our discussions today. There is no shortage of people wringing hands in Jamaica. All across Jamaica, people wringing hands about what is going on. And what we like to see are more people rolling up their sleeves and getting to work and giving advice as to how we get to work to deal with our challenges. So I'm sure that we will have some elements, not only of trying to understand where we are in the context of these exogenous shocks, but also trying to figure out what is it that we should be doing. Are there things that we're doing now that we ought not to be doing? And in their place, are there other kinds of policy initiatives we should be pursuing? We're also going to ask, after we give our panelists 3 minutes each for their initial introductions, we're going to invite you, our audience, to give us your perspectives, ask us your questions, give us any advice that you think would be useful to share to our audience. And so we will have a second segment where we will respond to those questions and maybe address any of the comments before we move to our final session where our panelists will give their closing remarks. So with that said, again, it's great to have you on board. It's wonderful to have these panelists, and I'm going to invite Dennis Chung to begin with his first 3-minute piece to tell us, where are we, Dennis? Are we going in the right direction in Jamaica?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, the question needs to be answered within the context of looking at the world relative to the world. And if you look at Jamaica, Jamaica is stronger than it was. You remember when the IMF had to intervene and we almost fell off a cliff. And if you look at what's happening globally, we are also in a better position than many countries. We have a greater capacity to resist declines in the economy now because we have lower debt levels, we have a better fiscal situation, we have a better macroeconomic state than we had at that time. But the truth is that the economy, I think, has still underachieved and still has certain infrastructural issues. So if you look at it relative to the rest of the world, and it's been said by the World Bank, and I really feel so, that 70% of underdeveloped economies might go into recession. We might just escape it, but it depends on the US. So where are we in the state of the economy? We're seeing some recovery taking place, but the truth is that when we get back to pre-pandemic levels, I don't think that we're going to see more than an average of 1 to 2% growth in the economy, because I don't think we have the capacity to grow beyond that in terms of how our infrastructure is set up. And certainly the next few months, I think, is going to be a difficult period for the economy and for people in particular, because one of the greatest inhibitors that we have to growth, I mean, we have the situation of crime, we have the situation of lack of law and order, which for me is huge and is the fundamentals of everything. But the biggest challenge that the Jamaican economy has had since 1972 is declining labor productivity. And the fact of the matter is that the problem that we have as an economy, when you talk about the housing crisis, when you talk about the crime levels, is really human resources. And I think that when you have a world economy that's apparently going through to a stagflation, that's going to have high inflation, and then you pair that with a set of human resources that does not have the capacity to withstand any long-term shocks, you're going to have a problem. You pair that with human resources that has low productivity, you're going to have a problem. And that, I think, is the biggest challenge for us. Now, what happens to the Jamaican economy is going to depend a lot on what happens in the U.S. If the U.S. goes into recession, we are going to go into recession. If the U.S. happens to avoid it, we can not come out so bad, but it's still going to be a problem. So, you know, it's tenuous, but it's going to be difficult over the next few months.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Anya, why don't you go right on, and then we'll come back and pick up on the various themes that come out of these introductory comments.
All right, so I want to take it from a little bit of a different angle. So Dennis would have spoken to, you know, how things are looking at the macro level. I want to talk about some positives from the capital markets level, just to add a different perspective. I mean, coming out of the high interest rate environment of the early 2000s, and so over the last 12 or so years would have seen where interest rates would have come off, but the positive behind that we've seen for local firms is that they now have access not just to debt financing. Yes, they have financing at you know, low interest rate, but they have also, we've seen where the capital markets have evolved to provide more financing and more opportunities for SMEs. So that is definitely, you know, a positive, and we're heading in the right direction with that. So businesses have been able to, you know, list on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, raise capital. We have maybe over 12 billion capital that has been raised over the last few years since the introduction of the Junior Market Initiative. So that gives companies patient capital as they look to grow, and it has also provided investment opportunities for investors. And what that does, if you think about it, is that it allows us to mobilize capital in the economy. We've moved to a state where we can take funding from those who have cash to lend, and lend in ways that can benefit businesses. You know, different types of finances that can meet their needs and allow them to scale and grow. And so that is a positive, but it's not happening at the right scale, and we need to see more of that. Certainly, we're also seeing, and it's unfortunate, you know, that things are we're going through this high interest rate, high inflation environment, because that may ultimately, you know, temper the momentum. But we're also seeing where, you know, financing has gone. It's not just public equity anymore. We're seeing the emergence of private equity as a source of financing for business. So when I look at the landscape, those things are going in the right direction. But we need so much more than that. We need financing to be able to ensure food security, you know, resilience against climate change, infrastructure development. And so there is a need for even more than what we're seeing now. And when I think about it, yes, we're having some positives, but it's not enough, and we need to create the frameworks that will allow for that, you know, financing and regulations and so on, that will allow for financing to move from the businesses that have the funding, the entities, the pension funds, the long-term institutional investors, to those that actually really need it. So when I think about it and I summarize it, yes, we have some positives, but there's a lot more work to be done in that regard.
Thank you so much, Anya. John, over to you.
Thank you, Professor. I want to congratulate the Seventh-day Adventists for putting on this this program. Not only is it a religious organization, but your members need to understand about business and need to understand about maneuvering in the environment and to make money. I'm impressed with Alfred and Cecil. Alfred, I knew him when he just started his business from scratch, and he's extremely successful. I didn't know Cecil when he started, but in a very, very short time, he has also become very successful. And all of these people and myself, we started as a very tiny business, and that's how businesses mostly get started. In Jamaica, generally speaking, you don't buy a business, you start a business, and you start it from small, and you have to work very, very hard to be successful, and there is a lot of obstacles along the way, but you have to keep at it. The other point would be that I see that on the stock exchange in particular, we're getting thousands and thousands of new investors coming in, small investors. We saw up until possibly when Wigton Wind Farm, before they came on, you had 40 or 50,000 investors in the stock market. Wigton Wind Farm came on, I think they were 50,000 alone, if I remember. And of course we saw just recently where this last listing garnered $5 billion of many, many small investors. So I think my message too of the persons listening is, while the stock market might seem like a strange thing, it's easy to buy shares. It's easy to become a client of a brokerage company, and stock market investing is one of the best ways to invest and grow your business. Land and real estate is good, but you can buy shares for $10,000 or $100,000 and see that grow. And so my message is to follow your leaders, get to know the stock market, start saving your money in the stock market, not in the banks necessarily, or the credit unions where you might only get 3 or 4%. You're going to get a lot more over time and build your wealth by investing in the stock market. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That was very atypical. All right, so we've had encouragement, and we've identified some of the challenges, especially at the level of human capital and productivity issues, and also at the level of the sort of regulatory system and processes that we need to open up financing, including financing for the small businesses about which John has just spoken. We're going to get into our second segment where we'll respond to your questions and we'll take other positions from our panelists in relation to this important issue. But we're out of time for our first segment. We're going to therefore take our first break, and we will be back shortly. And we're hoping that when we come back, we will also have some of your questions and comments that will be coming to us through our virtual technology. So back in a few minutes to continue this important discussion.
If there were no God, there would be no there would be no dream to be dreaming of. What a dreadful thought of an empty future. If there were no God, there would be no life. But we know that God is with us, and we know His majesty reigning now, the King eternal. Yes, we know the victory. I have lived among you, here on earth. I have shown you love. I have shown you love. I have shown you worth. How much your worth is over. Now it's over. You will find that the Spirit will remind you all the things I had in mind. Want you to remember. Oh, all men will know, all men will find, all men will see that you are mine. All men will know, all men will find, all men will see that you are mine. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Ooh, this whole world is not an accident. It came to be by the touch of His hand, through His blood He formed creatures and reached out and breathed His life into man. And in all of us, there's a calling in us for His blessings to show. The best part of it is the heart of it, is the good news we know. Every time the sun shows His face, was it the act of God causing you to turn Him away? Is it an act of God that you're refusing to pray? Is it an act of God causing you to turn Him away? Is it an act of God? What He is doing for me? It's hard to tell you how I feel. It's hard to tell you just how grateful I am. But I'm still gonna make it show. With every breath, gonna let you know. I am accepting, though I can't comprehend how I could be worth it all when I was bound, despised, and low. He arose again. He defeated
We're back with you on this panel discussion that's focusing on whether or not Jamaica is going in the right direction. And our panelists had the opportunity to provide some introductory comments. And now we're very pleased that we have received some questions from our virtual audience. In 1993, I visited the annual general meeting of the then Jamaica Exporters Association. The president at the time was Beverly Lopez, the late Beverly Lopez, a giant in Jamaica's private sector. And in her presentation as president, Bev called for an independent central bank for Jamaica. And that call came out of the liberalization process in Jamaica, where there was a recognition that it was important that we had an institution that was dedicated to protecting the financial system, dealing with inflation issues and issues of bank safety, with unfettered by any political considerations. And so that was the cry for an independent Bank of Jamaica. We have journeyed down the road over the last 29 years, and now we have institutionalized in Jamaica an independent central bank. And that independent central bank has, in response to the inflation that we're seeing, it has been raising its monetary policy interest rate. And one of the questions that we have is whether or not the Bank of Jamaica, in raising its interest rates that affects the entire financial system and engaging in other actions to try to stem inflation that is not domestically grown, but inflation that really comes to us from this external exogenous shock. Whether the Bank of Jamaica is handling that process as effectively as it ought to. And I'm going to ask John Mafu to give us some comment on that particular question. Let me just say the whole set of questions that we have, because there is another question dealing with the Bank of Jamaica, but in this context, in this situation, in terms of the reserves that have been accumulated and whether or not we have sufficient reserves to deal with inflation issues and also to deal with other emergencies and exigencies. And then we have two questions, and I'm going to ask Anya Walker to deal with that question about the sufficiency of the BOJ reserve position. And then we have a question on labor market issues. We have a labor market regulatory structure and legal structure that has been around for almost 40 years now. We have a Labor Relations Industrial Disputes Act, LRIDA. We established an Industrial Disputes Tribunal. And the question that comes to us now in the context of a very dynamic labor situation is, are the institutions and laws that we have established to deal with our labor market fit for purpose in 2022? And this is a matter that Dennis Chung has spent time thinking about, and I'm going to ask if he can comment on that issue. And then the other issue that Dennis is highly qualified to comment on is a question that we got about the relative security of stocks versus other forms of investment. John pointed out that stocks represent an important long-term investment vehicle for investors because you get to share in the fruits of businesses that are successful. But of course, we all know that businesses don't have to succeed, and when they don't succeed, your stock investments can actually go exactly the way of the unsuccessful business. And so there's a level of risk there. And so I think one of our audience members is trying to get a sense of the relative risk of investing in the stock market versus investing in other forms of financial instruments, whether bonds or mutual funds that are bond-linked. What are the relative advantages and disadvantages and the relative risks associated with those categories of investment? But John, let me start with you, because this issue of the interest rate policy is a very important issue in terms of how as a country we respond to these exogenous shocks. It is something that is really of concern right across the world now, where there are different perspectives as to the role the central bank should take in terms of its monetary policy interventions, especially in relation to inflation and impulses that are not grounded by domestic monetary supply activities. So maybe, John, we can start with that one.
So the matter of the interest rates is very complicated. But when you mentioned 1993, I remember 1993, the exchange rate was 10 to 1. I was managing a company at the time. In 1995, I was paying over 80% interest. And the company that I was running, which was a very old company, went bankrupt because we had heavy debt. And the interest rates went up to 80 to 100% because the government at the time was trying to protect the exchange rate because it was running away from 10 to 1. And they thought one of the ways of doing it is to increase the interest rates to this very high level to encourage people who are taking their money out of Jamaica to bring it back so they could have these high interest rates. That was one aspect of it, but it failed. So even you could get 40%, 30% in the bank, well, on treasury bills and so on. And remember at that time too, the governments were running huge deficits. That means they were spending more than they were taking in as taxes. And that was creating the need for more borrowing and so on. So we moved from there to where Professor talked about where we are today, and in a much safer place where for the past 3 or 4 years, interest rates have been very low, and mortgage rates have come down. Even banks were charging 5 or 6%. NHD was 5% or thereabouts. People could start affording homes. Construction had taken off. In the US, at the same time, people were paying 2.5% interest on mortgages. Those are the types of interest rates that you need to build an economy in single digits, 4 or 5%. When you start going beyond that, you start having serious problems in people being able to pay the interest, in people being able to pay to buy houses, and in people being able to get loans for businesses. And so the BOJ has attempted to start increasing interest rates, again, as a method of protecting the exchange rate, and they say as a method of controlling inflation. Increase in interest rates is an attempt to slow down the economy and make you poorer. The same way that devaluation makes you poorer. So, but the balance is, how far do you go? We are now at what, 5% BOJ? I fear that if we start going much above that, coupled with the uncertainties in the US, we start to get to that point where it's going to be too high. So my concern is hopefully they will maintain these levels and allow the economy to continue to grow.
Okay, thank you so much. Anya, why don't you take on board now the issue of the sufficiency of the reserves? And another question had come in that maybe either John or yourself could respond to. And the question is, are there any short-term measures available for dealing with the inflation problem that's affecting the government? And I assume that the questioner is seeking to understand if there are measures that can be used to deal with inflation that are not the current policy mix, which largely has involved raising interest rates by the central bank and trying to manage Jamaican dollar liquidity. because, obviously the perspective is that the less liquidity there is, the more difficult it would be for inflation impulses to be transmitted throughout the economy. Anya, do you want to take both the issue of the reserve sufficiency and any alternate options that the country at large has to deal with what is right now a global inflation problem? I was in a meeting this morning with a subsidiary of one of the companies I'm involved with operating in Holland, and Holland has its highest inflation rate in 47 years of 10%, not far from what we have here in Jamaica of 11%. So this is really a global challenge. So Anya, over to you.
All right, so I will answer the question of the net international reserve. So at this point in time, I think the issue, that question is a very relevant one, because currently we need more foreign exchange to, say, purchase the same amount of goods that we would have purchased last year. So when you look at it, inflation is being imported. So when you look at what is driving inflation, it's being driven by higher food prices, it's being driven by higher energy prices, whether it's oil or natural gas. But those are the main drivers of inflation. And it's spilling over to virtually everything else that we buy. And so you need more reserves to be able to purchase those same amount of goods. And then at the same time, the other element that feeds into inflation is exchange rate depreciation. And where there's a shortage of, USD, it's going to drive a depreciation in the currency and further add to, the cost of the goods that we import. So I'll answer the question real quickly that I think, yes, that we have adequate reserves. The reserve levels are off their peak, but at $3.8 million, just under $3.8 billion, it's fairly high by historical standards. And we have seen where the Bank of Jamaica would have intervened in the market over the last few months to the tune of about 400 million in sales through their B-Fix-It tool. And it has not caused a sharp reduction in the NIR levels. As a matter of fact, the NIR levels for the end of May is slightly above April levels. So I think that based on where we are, the reserve levels are adequate, and we're at a good point in terms of the inflows. Yes, we're going to be spending more and have been spending more, but tourism is on the recovery. And at the same time, remittances, though not as high as last year when everybody was sending money home to family, is still at a pretty high level. So I'm not concerned about that at this point in time. And the BOJ has been intervening to supply and to help to moderate inflation, because I think of all the tools that they have been using, that is the one that's most likely to impact inflation. Because when you look at inflation and the big drivers in terms of food prices and energy prices, that's all imported.
So, Anya, there was a supplementary question about whether or not there are alternative pools in the country's toolkit. And I wouldn't just say just the central bank, but the country's toolkit. Can you think of any other possibilities in terms of dealing with the inflation challenge beyond the policies that are currently being implemented by our central bank?
That's a really interesting question, because let me explain why I think central banks, and it's not just the BOJ. So when you look at it, even in the US, they're increasing interest rates, not to the tune, I won't negate the fact that we're going pretty hard and heavy with the interest rate increases. But if you look at it, the inflation is being supply side driven, right? And interest rates are not the most effective when addressing supply side driven inflation, because what we've seen is that we've had a shock, the Russian-Ukraine crisis, drought conditions. Let's not forget that countries from Pakistan, the U.S., Mexico, the U.S. Midwest, a lot of those areas, big agricultural areas, are experiencing serious drought conditions and have been since 2020. So it's supply side driven. You've had a shrinking supply, and the fact is, with Russia and Ukraine out of the mix, they are the breadbasket. They are considered the breadbasket of Europe because they produce so much of the grain globally. I think it's about 30 and 20% respectively of wheat and corn. So it's really supply side driven. But I think what policymakers are trying to do, because it's food, it's energy, it's things that you consume. You go to the gas station every day, you go to the supermarket and you're buying food. What they're really trying to do is control the inflation expectations. Because once you get in your psyche, this increase in prices, it becomes like a self-perpetuating cycle where people start demanding higher wages, and you don't price your goods and services based on where prices are today, but also based on where you expect. So that is what they're trying to anchor. But I think the BOJ is also doing something else that's really impactful, and I would have mentioned before. It's just that they're trying to I'm sure they don't want me to say this, but they're trying to control the extent to which we see movement in the currency by supplying to the market, and so you kind of mitigate the depreciation, which would compound things. But me personally, and this is my view, the interest rates won't necessarily curb the inflation at this point in time. But what we have seen some developed countries do in terms of the governments is that they have implemented like subsidies that are temporary and can be easily reversed to kind of offset the impact of higher inflation on their consumers.
And I think it would be fair to say, in the context of this discussion, that the Jamaican government has actually adopted a similar policy in relation to, for example, the electricity subsidy program and some of the food basket distributions. But I think there are a couple of important points that you make that our viewers and listeners would really need to understand and recognize. One is the issue of trying to deal with a supply-side-driven inflation problem when the only tools at your disposal are tools that affect the demand side. And that creates a fundamental challenge. But I think the Bank of Jamaica would say they can't deal with the supply side because that's out of their control, and so they're focusing on the policy instruments that are within their control. And I think the other important issue is trying to manage inflation expectations, which we see in the US now as a very important issue. And if you've been watching the US news where this is a problem that they're confronted with, this is something that they really are trying to focus on in the Fed now in terms of inflation expectations. But let's move on, because I know that we are running out of time for this segment, and we have two major issues that we're going to ask Dennis Chung to focus on. One is the whole set of labor-related issues in terms of whether our labor regulations and institutions are fit for purpose. There was another question that I was asking Dennis to look at, which is the comparison between stocks and other kinds of investments, or the monetary investments and their risk levels. And we have a couple of other questions that are linked to that, Dennis. One is, do you need to have a broker to purchase stocks in Jamaica? Another is, what is the best savings method, which I think is, in a sense, linked to that first question we just asked. And there's also a question about the role of Bitcoin. So I've put a lot onto your agenda, Dennis, but I know that your shoulders are very broad. So please, go ahead.
Yeah, all right, thank you. The first one, pretty quickly, labor market reform is critical. I think that's one of the things that has prevented us from growing as an economy. I start by saying in 2013, the IMF agreement said that one of the most important things that needed to happen for the turnaround is labor market reform. That has not happened. And I think that is the reason why this economy does not have the capacity to grow beyond 1 to 2% consistently. Because since 1972, we've been seeing a decline in labor productivity every year except for about 3 years in the 1980s. So unless we address the matter of labor market reform, then you're not going to have increased productivity, you're not going to have increased earnings. If you don't have enough increased earnings, then the whole matter of affordability is a question, and hence you have a housing crisis, not because you have a supply problem, but because you have a demand problem. People just cannot afford houses. And therefore, I think that reform in the labor market, particularly the rules surrounding the IDT, is a problem. I can't have a situation where if I catch someone on camera stealing, that they're reinstated the next day. What it does, and John will know, it actually creates an imbalance against small businesses to have the labor market rules that we have, and therefore our labor market reform has been stifling the growth of small businesses in many respects. They're taking much longer to grow than they normally would, and therefore I think that it's critical that we look at that. On the second issue of the stocks versus IRA in particular, it depends on your time horizon. That's very important. So, the first thing you want to do before you invest in stocks is say, what is my time horizon for investments? If you're going to invest in something for a month, then you don't go into stocks. You don't go into risky investments. You might want to buy something like bonds or, things that have very low risk, or put your money in the bank. In relation to stocks versus an IRA, it depends on the type of stocks. So a blue chip stock, for example, is something that is more safer. A stock that gives you dividends and capital growth. There are some high dividend yield stocks out there. There are some high capital growth stocks out there. What is your investment plan? What is your time horizon? In relation to an IRA, an individual retirement account, it has another benefit also in that they invest, and the pension regulations stipulates what you can invest in, certain stocks, a certain amount in stocks, a certain amount in foreign currency. But the advantage of that is you get the tax-free benefit also. So that's also a return. So whether they're different or which one is better depends on your objective, your time horizon. But whatever you do, whichever one you invest in, get a good broker. And on the matter of Bitcoins, I don't see that is some. I think it's a legal Ponzi scheme as far as I'm concerned. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you very much. And you're answering the question now, do you need a broker to invest in stocks? Let's just clear that up so our audience knows.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You do need a broker to invest in stocks, but it's very easy. You can go, they have apps now, you can go and put your trade in, and your broker will just execute for you.
So Anya, I can't, well, maybe I shouldn't do this, but Anya can speak to the fact that it's relatively easy to invest in stocks without providing a commercial for her company. So, Anya, she can? We're getting permission that she can.
Okay, so NCB Capital Markets, you can actually open a stock brokerage account, especially if you are already an NCB customer through our Go IPO platform. Open your account there. You don't even have to come into us. You can upload the ID, everything right there. And then if you have NCB online, you can begin to just buy and trade your stocks in our mobile app or on our online platform. So yes, pretty easy.
But for equity purposes, especially since both Anya and myself are affiliated with NCB, you can do this across the platform at any of the major capital brokerage.
You just may have to go in, though, depending on which institution it is. You may have to go in to do it. We do have an advantage.
I think we're now at the point where we take... no, we keep going? Okay, excellent, because we do have some other questions. And let me just respond to one. There's a question, is the bank FDIC insured? I wasn't clear if the questioner was talking about our central bank or talking about our commercial banks. So, okay, so it's commercial banks. And the reason that distinction is important is that a central bank doesn't really need federal or national insurance because of its structure. Central banks are the custodian of a country's money supply, and so their major challenge is to manage that money supply. There is no fear of a central bank running out of money in the national currency because it has full custody of that currency. But therein lies the danger, and it's a huge danger. And it's the reason why there's been this movement to independence among central banks, because the fact that central banks can essentially create their own currency provides them with one of the most difficult temptations to resist in any society, which is to create new currency when the economic circumstances do not merit the creation of new currency. And more than anything else, that's what leads to inflation in an economy. We're not talking about the current situation, but typically inflation is induced by what we call monetary forces, the fact that central banks are essentially printing money beyond the productive capacity of the country. And so that's really important, and we need to understand it in the context of the challenges. In terms of our commercial banks in Jamaica, we don't say they're FDIC insured because that's an American institution, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. But we have our similar structure in Jamaica, created interestingly, maybe not interestingly, coming out of our 1990s financial crisis, where the government actually had to go in and protect the depositors of many individuals who had deposits at institutions that failed. And coming out of that, and beginning in the early 2000s, coming out of that late 1990s experience, Jamaica established the Jamaica Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the JDIC, which insures deposits of individuals in commercial banks, up to the tune now, for many years it was $600,000, and then you will have seen commercials over the last several years with the JDIC promulgating the fact that you have been upgraded and your deposits are now insured up to the level of $1.2 million. Of course, we might point out that the $1.2 million of today is probably worth less than the $600,000 in real terms when JDIC was founded. But that is maybe a minor point, but nevertheless important in the context of this whole issue of the impact of inflation on an individual's earning capacity and also an individual's wealth. The other comment that I'll ask our panelists to speak to, and I just read it. The lack of overall development in Jamaica is reflected most in our educational failure at the level of early childhood education. And the question from our audience participant is, any comment from the panelists on this statement? So my question to the panelists, any comment?
Maybe I can make.
Please go ahead, John.
I have a little bit of exposure to the Ministry of Education through the fact that I chair an inner city school. And the questioner is correct. We turn out kids out of primary school that cannot keep up, with the requirement of high school. And a large percentage of our children don't graduate from high school, fall out, or they finish but can't read and write. The result of that is that today we have a serious shortage of labor for jobs that require a minimum high school level education. The Kentucky Fried Chicken is advertising for staff, and they can't get enough staff. They need 800 members of staff. The BPO operators are limited to how much they're going to grow because they can't get the educated level staff. So my feeling is the ministry is really failing us over the many, many years. And it's the bureaucracy in the ministry that is perpetuating kids graduating from primary school that are not up to standard and will not be able to make it in high school. And I think this is a serious, besides crime and violence, this is the most serious problem facing us for the future. Jamaica can't grow without at least functional laborers who can operate.
Thanks so much, John. So let's make those 2 points and combine them, because we haven't said much about the crime and corruption issues in Jamaica. It is a major concern that John has. I didn't realize it was so much of a concern that it's how he ends his profile. But it's absolutely a valid concern. Nothing has affected Jamaica's chances for development as the levels of social instability manifest in our world-leading homicide rate. And so this is one of the reasons why dealing with issues of crime and corruption are so fundamentally important to any chance of Jamaica going in the right direction on a sustained basis. But what I hear John saying also, though, and I think there is significant agreement on that front, and it links into Dennis's point about labor, especially as we're moving forward into our fourth industrial revolution, into a digitized economy. It is absolutely critical that countries are going to have very well choreographed educational systems to lead countries in that direction. And so education from the early childhood level, but also incorporating tertiary, secondary, and vocational and technical training. Countries like Jamaica are going to have to move far more assertively in terms of improving their educational systems to be able to compete on global labor markets. So I think we're pretty clear that we really have to deal with those issues for sustained improvements. Two other questions that have come in. One says today in the U.S. stock market, the S&P 500 and the S&P 500 is one of the indicators that is used to measure the overall performance of the stock market in the U.S., another being the Dow Jones Industrial. They went into bear territory meaning that there's negative change in the stock market index, indices are going down. What is the implication for the Jamaican economy and also the housing market in Jamaica? And Dennis, I think you'll be able to respond to that one. And then Jamaica needs to produce more and depend less on imports. We have the capabilities so to do. We need to eat what we grow and grow what we eat, and we need to produce. We are so fortunate that we have with us the president of an organization that focuses on produce, and also focuses on agriculture, especially in an export context, but also in the context of domestic production and consumption. So I'd ask John to also comment on that question about Jamaica's need to produce its way out of its economic challenges. So Dennis, do you want to start with the comparative stock market challenge?
Yeah, well, does the U.S. stock market affect us? The U.S. stock market doesn't affect us directly. What affects us is the reasons why the U.S. stock market is going into bear territory. So people tend to shift from stock market when interest rates are high, right? Because it's a greater return. So as you see people, interest rates going up, which it is in the U.S., persons will move to what they call the safe currency, which is U.S. dollars. Therefore, people will pull money out of the stock market because if interest rates start going up, I mean, John speaks about it, that companies will tend to do worse than they did before, so you don't expect the same levels of return. Not that I think it's important for interest rates to go up, right? But it's just a cycle. So what does that mean? That means that if the stock market is doing poorly, then it affects the income levels of consumers. And in particular, IRAs are affected significantly. So it means that consumers are poorer. If you think about the effect that it has on Jamaica, Jamaica depends on the U.S. for two things primarily. We do some exporting there, but primarily tourism and also remittances. If consumers earn less, they have less money to spend on tourism. And we saw in the recession or the pandemic that the thing that really this economy lives and dies by is tourism. So if people are earning less money in the U.S., then they're gonna spend less money on vacations. They also will send less money back in terms of remittances, but that depends on how much they're affected, because remittances are somewhat resilient because people send back money to support their children and families. So they have to be in a really bad way not to send back that money. So It's not that it's a stock market directly that affects us, but the impact that the reduction in the market has on the consumer base, which is really what affects Jamaica.
And I think what we might want to suggest that in the U.S. context, maybe the labor market statistics have a tighter link to both tourism and remittances than the stock market, because if people are out of work, then they're not going to take vacations and they're not going to be able to send remittances, and it's going to be much more impactful. And I think the good news is that the labor market in the U.S. is very hot.
Right now.
Yes. Right now. Yeah. Not on, yes, absolutely. Yes. I mean, sorry? Well, yes, it's bad news for us, but then the interesting issue, of course, is that Jamaica actually also has the lowest unemployment rate in its history, so the labor market is actually pretty hot here in Jamaica as well. But of course, there are all sorts of nuances associated with that, because we really need to concentrate not just on unemployment, but on decent employment and employment that allows for effective consumption. And in that context, Jamaica continues to have huge, huge problems. But John, your organization is a strong believer in the importance of production. So tell us a little bit about how we produce our way out of our challenges, because we know you believe that we have to. I think the question is the how. Am I correct?
Correct. Just to show you one more thing, though, of how Jamaica economy is so interlinked with the U.S. A big part, and I don't know how big a part, but the construction boom that we are having is being pushed by Jamaicans in the States who made a lot of money, who saved a lot of money, and have now invested in real estate in Jamaica. And any of the real estate developers you talk to will tell you 15, 20% or more of their units are being bought by bankers, Jamaican bankers, and for Jamaicans living in the U.S. So if their income comes down, it affects our. So as Dennis said, it's totally linked. Our tourism, everything is linked. We went through a very difficult time, as you said, Professor. For 2.5 years, first with COVID, then with logistical problems and with huge shipping cost increases, then now with oil prices and so on. And a lot of Jamaican, big and small companies had to really re-engineer themselves during the past 2.5 years in order to survive. They had to cut their costs. And we started to see in 2021, in late 2021, improvements in the results of companies on the junior stock exchange who had re-engineered themselves. And these companies who have survived are now in a better position to export and to export to the Caribbean in particular. I have not, I think Dennis and the Professor talked about the history of Jamaican economy in the 70s and so on, and 80s, having a good manufacturing base. But we went through turbulent times, including the 90s, when many of our manufacturing companies were destroyed. The banks were destroyed. In the late 80s, when the government opened up, liberalized the economy and allowed imports to come in to compete against our Jamaican manufacturers, we weren't ready. And unfortunately, our Jamaican business persons and so on are not as aggressive as I would like. But what I see as positives is our tourism sector. The businesses that are Jamaican businesses that are operated are world class. That shows us we can be world class. We can compete with the best in one segment. But we can compete too in our manufacturing sector. But we can't, our market in Jamaica is not big enough, so we have to lift ourselves now to fight to go to the Caribbean and sell our products. And we have to also, as Cecil did, he joined the junior stock market. Those 40 or 44 companies have been transformed. So Jamaican companies can be transformed, either in tourism or in the junior stock market. We now need to fight hard. We have survived the most difficult times. Let's go and try and sell to our Caribbean neighbors.
So I think that is really such a useful link, and you mentioned two examples that we have with two of the executives that are sitting with us today. Cecil Foster from Fosrich and Alfred Thomas from Pioneer Distribution, and both organizations have really felt the urgent need of expanding their operations beyond the Jamaica domestic base. And I think I hear you saying, John, that that is a model that many small and larger companies need to contemplate very, very carefully, because as big as we think Jamaica is, our market size really does not allow for the kind of scale to be internationally competitive. And when you point to the issue of tourism, one of the reasons, an important reason why our tourism entities have been operating at an internationally competitive level, one, they've obviously been able to build upon an obvious strength in the Jamaican economy and society, but also they have not been focusing their operations on the small Jamaican tourism market. If they were doing that, they just could not operate at an internationally competitive level. So I think that's the lesson that you're saying is there as we seek to produce our way out of the challenges. And sometimes you can do this without exporting, but you have to recognize the importance of adopting international standards in what you do. And some of our companies that are not exporters, they have either used ISO kinds of reference points or other standard bases to make sure that they're operating at a level that will lead to more sustainable operations. We still have a number of other questions coming in. I see a question, what is the JMEA? So let me just repeat, that's an important organization. It's the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association. We used to have two organizations in Jamaica, a Jamaica Exporters Association and a Jamaica Manufacturers Association, and the two entities came together, it would have been about 12 years ago, John? 10 to 12 years ago? I think so. Recognizing that there was so much coherence and the ability to intersect with their operations that they really needed to function as a single unit. There are some other questions that we have here. The question is, why does Jamaica catch a cold if the U.S. coughs? I think we've responded to that. Because the U.S. is our dominant trading partner, 70-odd% or 60-odd% of our tourists come from the United States. A very significant component of our remittances come from the United States. The United States is the country with which we trade the most on a physical trade basis as well. And so we can clearly understand why under those circumstances, if there is recession in the US, it's likely to have a disproportionate impact on Jamaica just because of our size. There is an important question. There's a question about we need to shift the dynamics of the dependability of remittances. And I think that question is, should we seek to structure our economy on a sustainable basis, focusing only on or primarily on getting remittances? And I think the answer to that is clear, which is why we talk about the issue of production and export. So, remittances have been resilient, and that's the point that Dennis makes, but no country wants to have its economic survival dependent on its diaspora sending money back. So we'd like to see that as the gravy and not the meal. When it becomes the meal again, you are far more vulnerable. There is a major question that I'd like our panelists, and I don't know how much they've been following this particular issue, but it is an important one. We talked about the issue of the importance of education, the importance of developing our human capacity. There has recently been a very substantive report on the educational system in Jamaica. It's called the Jamaica Education Transformation Commission Report. But of course, because the chairman was the renowned Jamaica's most distinguished academic, Professor Orlando Patterson, who has been a professor at Harvard University for 52 years now. He was the chairman of that commission, so it's routinely described as the Patterson Report. And that report provided some really important messages and prescriptions for dealing with Jamaica's educational system. It built upon a 2004 commission report, which was led by Dr. Ray Davis, which also had very, very important policy and institutional initiatives. And the question is saying, why is the government not saying how they plan to finance the recommendations of the Patterson report? I don't know if any of our panelists have been following this report with sufficient detail to give a comment, otherwise I'll try. But
yeah, what I'll say is that I don't know the specific details, but the problem I have, Prof, is you said that there was a Ray Davis report in 2004, and I remember that report very well. And there have been several crime reports also, right? The problem, I think, is not that we don't want to finance it. I just think we don't have a will to implement many of these reports that are put on the table. So we have multiple crime reports. We have multiple reports on education. You know, we have reports on a whole lot of things, and they just stay on a shelf. And I think that's the issue. It's not that we don't know what the solutions are. We know as a country, we know what the solutions are. But then it comes back to your initial comments about the person with many hands and the person who is for this or against this, not because of any objective thing, but because of ideologies that we've developed. So, you know, that's what I'd say. I've seen the transformation of schools. I sat on the Jamaica College School Board with Danny Williams, and, you know, when it went through the transformation. So it can be done, but I just don't think that we have the will. And then it comes back again to understanding that what drives change is labor, and then comes back to labor market reform again. Okay, you know.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Let me add a few points to this. As I said, it's a very compelling report, and one of the fundamental points that it makes is that we have a system of educational apartheid in Jamaica. No, that's not novel. You know, we all know that. So Dennis mentions Jamaica College, and Jamaica College was able to undergo a process of organizational restructuring, helped a lot by its old boys. But Jamaica College also benefited from the fact that some of these old boys are really quite wealthy and really had the capacity to inject significant quantums of capital into Jamaica College. And of course, there's an overall base. Now, that doesn't mean that it could not have gone awry, or it doesn't mean that there weren't problems. There were clearly problems even with the base that it had. But the fundamental challenge, I think, that we have in Jamaica, which is why I think it's often useful to start these conversations at the level of the economy, is that when your economy malfunctions, everything else malfunctions as well. Because it is the economy that allows for injecting funds into education, injecting funds into crime control. When we talk about our crime problems, yes, they manifest in many different ways, but they manifest strikingly over many years in the lack of funding for capacity development in our force, for ongoing training, for recruitment, for mobility. See how many times you hear on the media situations where people are calling police stations and the response is that we can't come now because the one vehicle that we have, it broke down. Right? So part of the challenge that you have, not the only challenge, but part of the challenge that you have as a country is that when your economy is malfunctioning. It's very, very hard to get high quality education, high quality hospital services. I mean, I heard a comment the other day that, I mean, we have apartheid in our hospital system in Jamaica as well, between Kingston and rural Jamaica, and between Jamaica and Miami. And there's no question that that is correct. But the question is why? And it's largely driven not by the fact that our doctors and our nurses don't want to to help to cure people, but because we have resource shortages. That doesn't mean we can't do better with the resources that we have, but we have to deal with the fundamental economic challenges that then translate into our ability to deal with these other issues, which is why this is so important. Anya, would you like to come in on some of these issues? Because I'm sure you have a perspective on many of them.
So I was actually echoing your sentiment, because that's how I would have answered, that it actually takes money to execute. It takes financing and significant amounts of it to create the kind of educational system that's going to, deliver. I mean, if you have a child in Jamaica that has maybe learning challenges, there is zero support, and that's what you end up with. Somebody who is well off can afford to send your child to a school that has special education teachers. They can send them to therapy. So many kids have dyslexia, and that goes undiagnosed, and other learning disabilities that with, resources and opportunities, those can be addressed. I mean, my friend's son, they were actually in Jamaica, but they migrated to the UK, and in terms of the resources that's available to that child, in school, he has like access to a tablet that he can, speak, and that converts it to text, because he has challenges reading and understanding, and he's very brilliant. He just has, problems with certain aspects of reading and even math, but pretty smart guy, and there's some skill and capabilities that can be focused on. And the truth is, as you pointed out, Jamaica College has gone through a transformation, but there was a lot of money, and I know some of those old boys, and they were committed, and they went about aggressively recruiting funds from the old boys, and then they got that big endowment from an old boy. So that made a huge difference. So it does take cash to care. I sound like a politician, but it's true. It is true. And the question for us is going to be, so once we have, brought the debt levels down and created room in the budget, how are we going to, direct the resources to address the needs in education and healthcare and so on, to make a difference and to eliminate that apartheid and create equal opportunities? Because not because you have a learning disability, not because you're from an inner city community, don't mean you can't be great. Richard Branson is a good example of somebody who's dyslexic, but he's a billionaire. He's made transformations for himself. So the right kind of environment can allow for that.
Okay, John, any comments? Or we're getting close now. We're going to ask you to do your closing comments. But any comment on this issue with education and the Patterson report, and how we deal with the resource issues that are so challenging?
I was able to listen to the president of Rwanda at a session in Pegasus, where there was a town hall meeting, and he was so impressive in what he has achieved, coming from a terrible disaster, taking the country through to being one of the fastest growing countries in Africa, to getting down their corruption index, to improving their ease of doing business. He has done a huge amount. Then you look at the president of Ukraine, and you are inspired by these things, and you start thinking to yourself, so why can't we get a leader like that? But when I look at our politicians, they're flawed. Just like other politicians, we are able to watch what's going on in the U.S., and the greatest country in the world obviously has flawed politicians and a flawed political system. So, we shouldn't be thinking that there is this one leader that we have to get who is going to save us. It would be nice. It would be nice to have a leader that was brave enough to say, members of parliament only make $4 million Jamaican a year, they need to be increased in their salary, but they're not willing to do that. They're afraid of the backlash. But then again, so are the American politicians who are afraid to do anything about gun control. So it comes back to our people, too. Are they willing to push the politicians? Are they willing to expect more? And I guess it's not in our culture. But it comes down to what you said. If starting back in 2013 or 14, when they signed the IMF agreement, it actually was important because it caused the loss of the PNP in my mind. They made a big sacrifice, a political sacrifice for the good of the country, and that has sustained us through the JLP continuing it. And if things had continued, and things will continue to get better economically, then it will start to have, I believe, an impact on some of those other problems, the way you have identified having reduced debt that allows you to do more for your country.
Thank you so much. We're getting, I think we only have 7 minutes left, so I'm going to ask our panelists at this point in time to give their closing remarks as we try to bring this session to an end and try to see if we can pull together the lessons that we will have gleaned from the discussion. So Dennis, why don't I start with you?
Yeah, I'll just say that, you know, one of the things that, or the main thing why the economy has not grown at any level really. I mean, when we're in normal times, we're not going to grow more than 1 to 2%, and I've always said it consistently. In the 1980s, we had growth of about 3 years of about 6%, and that's it. It's because with the one thing that we've not dealt with as a country is deal with labor productivity. Labor productivity is what drives growth. And if you don't have that, if you don't take care of your people, it comes back to the crime, it comes back to the education, it comes back to the basic things on the ground, right? The whole thing about the labor laws. One of the things I have a big problem with is this thing called collective bargaining. I cannot be producing $100 a day and someone is producing $20 a day and then we get the same incentive at the end. It doesn't work like that. So unless we fix labor productivity, we're going to get to a point where this country is back at pre-pandemic levels, but the economy will not have the capacity to grow beyond 1 to 2% in any sustainable way. And what that means is that we're going to be left further and further behind.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Anya?
All right, so let me take a more, short-term view than Dennis, because I think he would have added a lot of color there. I think where we are in an economy is that we would have recently, reopened the economy, and we've seen where that has been huge for businesses after 2 years of uncertainty around your always, demand from consumers that is returning, and businesses, are, expectant and hopeful about that. But there are significant headwinds from the external environment and also locally in terms of inflation, and just navigating that, because inflation, it really robs consumers of their purchasing powers and power, and businesses of their capacity to invest, in addition to the headwinds from higher interest rates as the central bank tries to control that. So there are those challenges that we're going to try to navigate. Added to that, food security is a big issue. But on the positive side, we've been on a path of debt reduction. The debt spiked during the pandemic because of the contraction in GDP, and also because the revenues fell off and we had a bigger deficit as the government tried to provide, support to the economy as well, consumers to businesses. But we're back on track, and with that, path to debt reduction, hopefully this is something that we can sustain despite the headwinds that we're facing, and we'll be able to navigate that. The food security is a big one that could really create some problems for us. So we would love to see the government sort of, planning around that and developing issues to address that. Plans to address that. I remember, in the 2008 crisis where we were kind of head in the sand saying, oh, we won't be affected by that financial crisis. Hopefully, we'll have a different sort of approach to this, I guess, emerging food crisis and how we navigate that. So altogether, some of the structural issues remain around, the labor productivity, as Dennis would have pointed out, mobilizing capital for infrastructure projects. Yes, we have made significant headroads, especially on, the road network side, but we still need to build our resilience, to deal with climate change, to provide health care, to mobilize even more capital for businesses. And so one can only be hopeful that we continue to reduce the debt and create capacity to do some of those.
Thank you so much, John.
So, we are a small, vulnerable nation, but we compete in terms of work, in terms of employment with China, India in particular. For instance, in the BPO sector, which is a growing sector for us, we compete with Indian workers. India and China, as big as they are and as powerful as they are, their per capita income is very close to ours. China, I think, is 7,000 or 8,000. India is 7,000. That means that of the 2.5 billion people in those two countries, more than half of them are earning less than Jamaican workers. So we, talk about increasing our minimum wage. We talk about acknowledging the poverty here. But the reality is that a BPO sector, when they quote on a job in the US for Amazon or whoever, they're competing against an Indian BPO company. So we have to be aware of that and say to ourselves, knowing that, what are the sectors that we can work in to develop and grow? Jamaica is definitely a difficult place to do business, whether you're small or large, the bureaucracy, the corruption, the crime. But knowing all of that and knowing what we talked about, which is an economy that has stabilized and is improving, people have to go to work, they have to work hard, they have to push hard. On the stock market, we're seeing new young companies coming on in the finance and building sector. We see where Seprod has bought a company almost the same size as them in Trinidad. We're beginning to see a different tact, a different way of doing business. We see companies like Proven and Kingston Properties and Cygnus growing at phenomenal rates and getting big. So I am hopeful that this new type of entrepreneur, this younger type of entrepreneur, the junior market transformation and our small business sector growing, it will take time, but if the government keeps the economy on track, and they seem to be doing that, in time we will start to grow and get out of this.
Panelists, thank you so much. And so, sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, we end on what I think is a very positive note. I think our panelists have said that, and I'm trying not to misquote any of them, the economy is moving in the right direction, but very slowly, too slowly. And there are significant risk levels and headwinds that we need to deal with. These risks, headwinds include, we have to deal with the human capital issues, the human development issues, absolutely critical. Otherwise, we're not going to go beyond the growth rates about which Dennis speaks. We have to deal with the issues of crime and corruption, and we have to do it in a collective way, recognizing that all of us have to be responsible for this process, and we have to deal with the regulatory challenges that are making it more and more difficult for businesses to function. But if we can get those things right on the top of the bipartisan process that allowed the Jamaican economy to stabilize and indeed allowed us to offer some support in that first exogenous shock, because we had a level of welfare support to Jamaicans that actually was atypical for a country of our size and economic level. And that support was founded fundamentally on the fact that we had engaged in this process of stabilization and there were some financial buffers. So we were able to deal with an unprecedented crisis in an unprecedented way for Jamaica. So there is hope, there is optimism, but there are serious, serious headwinds. And so we invite everyone to be a part of the process of trying to deal with these headwinds by playing your own part in the productivity levels at your own workplace environment, and also in doing what John had indicated, that we need to recognize that we will get the leaders that we demand. And so as a country, we have to hold our leaders to the highest levels of accountability, and that will facilitate a faster movement down the economic trajectory and the human development trajectory for Jamaica. I am out of time. I really want to thank our panelists for their insights, for their engagement, for their willingness to be a part of this process. I want to thank the organizers, ASI, Elder Thomas, and the team, Elder Murray. I want to thank you also very much, EJC, for hosting us so wonderfully, and of course, all of you, our viewers and our listeners who have been a part of this process, and I hope that you have gained some nuggets that you can take to work or to school tomorrow morning, recognizing that the success of Jamaica is in the hands of all of us. Thank you all very much, and have a wonderful night.
Wow. What a very interesting and very informative panel discussion we have had here this afternoon. And I want to say thank you so much, Professor Winth and the panelists, for the very insightful and very pointed discussions that you have shared with us this evening. Thanks to Ms. Walker and Mrs. Chung and Mafu for the time that you have taken out of your busy schedule to be with us here this evening and to provide us with such very timely and relevant information as we face the challenges in the marketplace. And so on behalf of the Adventist laypersons and services industry, we strive to share Christ in the marketplace, and the marketplace includes not just within the Christian church, but of course across the length and breadth of Jamaica. So thank you for sharing in our program this week. May I invite you to join us again tomorrow evening. It's going to be 7 o'clock for another very interesting program as we continue to feature the ASI Week 2022, breaking out of our walls to engage our territory. Going to ask you where you are now just to join me in prayer, bow your heads and assume an attitude of prayer as we pray. Father, we want to thank you for the resources that you have blessed us with this evening so that we're able to share this wealth of information with your people, all of whom have been viewing this program and are benefiting from the information that have been shared. We ask your blessing upon our country as we continue to move through this difficult period that is faced not only by us here in Jamaica, but indeed all across the world. We know that you are the sovereign leader, and so that we ask that you will impart to our leaders the wisdom and the knowledge that they will need, just as you gave to that wise King Solomon. Lord, we pray that you will give to our leaders, or political leaders, or business leaders, or church leaders, all our leaders, the wisdom and the knowledge and the understanding they need to forge ahead in these challenging times and to take us successfully to the end of this world. Be with us now as we separate one from the other. May your Holy Spirit continue to guide us on our journey home and give us a restful night and prepare us for another challenging day at work tomorrow. We are assured that you will not only hear, but you will answer our prayers. And so we leave everything now in your capable hands. We pray and we say thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
people. From all denominations. Rise up from slumber. Pick up your Bible. Jesus. King Jesus. This the word in a crisis. No time for ignorance. No fight in a war. Holy war. Don't fight for King Jesus. This word in a crisis. No time for ignorance. So we fight in a war. Holy war. Don't fight for King Jesus. Step up. Hold on pon your victory, Christian. Hold on pon it, hang on pon it, hold on pon it. Alright, listen me again. Things already better. Things already better. Already better. For the Lord is on our side. Things already better. Things already better. Standard English. Things are already better. Things are already better. Already better. For the Lord is on our side. They are already better. They are already better.
Yeah, man, say if you believe that things better, and we are Christians, so we're not going to suffer, because Jesus is our Redeemer. Then sing it now, Aaron. See, I will not suffer. Oh, I will not beg for bread. No way, no way. Jesus is my provider. Oh, I will not beg for bread. Come on and sing if you believe it. Hey, mommy, daddy, oh. Hey, mommy, daddy, oh. Daddy, oh. Hey, mommy, daddy, Never, 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 never beg for bread. Never, 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 never beg for bread. Never, 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 Hey, so here on a man, get up out to your living room, get up out to your bedroom, dance and jump around because Jesus is alive.
Follow me now. Oh, for me God, oh God. Oh, for me God, oh God. Mighty God is He. God in the lion's den. God in the wilderness. The part in the Red Sea. Mighty God is He. Oh, give me it again. 2 more time. 3 more time. 4 more time.